When you think of a dirt track, what do you think of? Probably your local quarter or half mile, right? This was much of the scene in NASCAR in the early 50s, except take a look at this. A 1.5 mile high banked super speedway covered in dirt. This is Memphis Arkansas Speedway. It was located just outside of West Memphis, Arkansas, a somewhat obscure place in the country, but the home of a lost speedway in NASCAR's tumultuous history. But right before we get into the dark and tragic history of the Speedway, make sure you leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, be sure to comment some dark pieces of NASCAR history you'd like me to check out and cover in the future. Anyways, let's get right into it. After construction began on the racetrack in 1954, the owners ran out of money to pave it. The racing surface is a pretty crucial part of the racetrack thing. This would have cost an estimated $100,000, which is about $1 million in today's money. Joking aside, this was a massive project in 1954. Darlington Raceway had just been constructed a few years prior, the biggest spectacle of a track up to this point. However, as previously mentioned, this would be a 1.5 mile track, just longer than Darlington. So nothing like this had ever been attempted. It was the longest oval in NASCAR and the third longest track on the schedule, right behind two road courses, the Daytona Beach Road Course and the Linden Airport. So since they couldn't pave the track, they instead covered it in dirt, which in hindsight was a massive mistake. So now we're to the grand opening on October 7th, 1954. Here lies a 1.5 mile super speedway completely covered in dirt. This was the pride and joy of three local owners, Clarence Camp, Nat Epstein, and Harold Woolridge. The track was built in the midst of beautiful farmland, accompanied by a small lake on either side. It had a front stretch that spanned 2,500 feet, the same length as the backstretch, with grandstands that could hold 15,000 spectators along the start-finish line. This is a spectacle in itself, as the track still holds the record for the longest dirt oval in NASCAR history. The sheer size of the track would promote super high speeds regardless of the surface. And this would prove to be true, as the pole speed was an average of almost 100 miles per hour when the NASCAR Grand National Series hit the track for the first time, the fastest dirt track on the schedule by a long shot. For reference, Darlington's pole speed was an average of 108 miles per hour, the fastest oval at the time. Despite the assumed danger of the track, the first annual Mid-South 250 went about as smooth as possible. Lee Petty would lead the opening 150 laps before breaking an axle and being passed by Buck Baker, who took home the checkered flag. Other notable drivers that participated in the event were Herb Thomas, Herschel McGriff, and the Flock brothers. The track's second event just a year later uncovered one particular problem with the track. It was initially planned to run on June 5th, 1955, but it was delayed until the end of the month due to rain. However, after drivers arrived at the track again on June 26th, they would be turned down for the second time after another rainstorm. Finally, after 2 months of delays, the race took place on August 14th. So this track definitely took much longer to dry than any paved track or any short dirt oval. Despite this, the race drew a lot of interest due to the relatively high purse of $11,500, and it showed, with a crowd of around 15,000 spectators, a massive success. The track would host a second race in 1955, the third event in track history, in which the pole speed eclipsed 100 miles per hour for the first time. However, this event would mark just the beginning of a horrible string of wrecks that happened at the racetrack. In what would be his first ever start in the Grand National Series, future Daytona 500 winner Tiny Lund would have a horrible wreck. On lap 65 of the race, Lund would be caught up in a wreck where he'd flip end over end. Fortunately, he survived with just a broken arm and would be back to racing the next year in 1956. Lund's injuries were a direct result of a broken seatbelt. Ironically, his funding for the race came from Carl Rupert, who was a seatbelt supplier. The track escaped tragedy this time, but this wouldn't last for long. It wouldn't be until the fourth event at the track in 1956 when true disaster occurred. Not only were there concerns about the speed, but all the track's problems started with the dirt surface. It was totally unmanageable according to many reports at the time. This was due to the abuse from heavy race cars, fields of 40+ racing hundreds of miles each. This often led to extended cautions during the race, just waiting on the dust to settle. Think Bristol Dirt in 2021, just on a much larger scale. Drivers couldn't see and spectators couldn't see. During qualifying for the 1956 Mid-South 250, Clint McHugh was doing about 90 miles per hour when he flipped his car over a, quote, flimsy 3-foot guardrail outside of turn 3, tumbled 50 feet down the embankment and into one of the lakes. He unfortunately did not survive. As with many tracks, safety was a big issue at the time. And since the owners didn't have enough money to even pave the track, they definitely had no interest in adding walls or strong guardrails at the very least. However, things would only get worse the next day during the race. Thomas Pretty, in only his third career race, would flip his car at the end of the grueling 2,500-foot-long rough front stretch into turn 1 multiple times and would be ejected from his car. He would succumb to injuries less than an hour later at a nearby hospital. The track returned to the schedule in 1957 one final time, just to be plagued by even more dust storms. One caution in the race lasted for over an hour due to blinding and choking dust from the race surface. As the track owners could still not raise the capital they needed to pave the track, they closed it and sold the property to a local farmer who would go on to grow rice and soybeans on the land. Today, you can still see the shape of an oval in the midst of flat, empty farmland in eastern Arkansas. Overall, the track was a complete mess. The dangers of the speed, the lack of safety, the inability to raise money, and the track surface led to nothing but controversy, confusion, and tragedy. To put into perspective just how deadly the races were here, let's look at it this way. In the 5 events of the track's history, there were 2 deaths. That puts this track at the same amount of fatalities as Atlanta, Darlington, and even Talladega, all tracks that have hosted over 100 races. At the conclusion of the 2021 season, 2,678 races had been run in NASCAR's top division, with 29 fatalities. So, with these numbers, despite Memphis Arkansas Speedway only hosting less than 0.2% of all races in series history, it accounts for 7% of the deaths. Honestly, I think it would have been even worse if they paved the track. They probably wouldn't have increased the safety, and it would have ramped up speeds even more. Further, the shareholders probably would have held onto it for a few more years if they invested more money into it. This could have definitely led to more tragedy down the road. But that's just my opinion, and let me know what you guys thought about it. I hope you enjoyed. I love diving into these obscure stories in NASCAR, so if you have any suggestions of what I should cover next, then let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.